Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to the High Fantasy Podcast. Today we got another author interview for you, and today we are talking with Miss Taylor Aston White. Taylor is the author of the Alice Skye urban fantasy series, of which the second installment, DRUIDS STORM, comes out today. Taylor enjoys exploring mythology and European fairy tales to create her own modern magic world. After working several jobs, she decided to become a full-time author and now spends the majority of her time between her young son who likes to help with her writing by slamming his hands across the keyboard and writing the weird and wonderful stories that pop into her head. Shalini and I had a really good time speaking with Taylor. In this episode, we talked a lot about urban fantasy as a genre and kind of the place it has in the broader fantasy genre and I suppose even in the literary world in general. And the details about Taylor's new release are in the description of this podcast. And hope you enjoy listening to it. Cheers. Alrighty, folks, so here we have Miss Taylor Aston White with us today. Taylor, thanks again for coming onto the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Just describe a little bit about your writing style and the Alice Skye novels.
Oh, my writing style is winging it. So literally, an idea comes to my head and I write it down and kind of run with it. So stories are very weird and wonderful, really. But it's finding the time, because obviously my son's a toddler and I'm actually pregnant as well. So it's actually finding the time to get these books out. It's quite hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine there's quite a lot of going back and forth. Yeah.
Yeah. We've actually never touched upon that, is that we've interviewed some women authors for sure, but most of them have been men named James.
Yeah,
I don't know.
It's like this repeating pattern of names.
and most of them, I think a good number of them, some of them were married and older, and some were I guess young, like in their 20s, 30s, and single. And that's something that didn't come up a ton, which was, like being a parent and being an author full time at both is gotta be quite tough. So and is any part of your like experience as an adult and a mother a part of your stories, like in any way, Taylor?
Other than the fact my son's a little demon, probably inspires me for some of the bad guys. But that's really much it. It is quite hard, and I'm sure there is loads of authors out there that are mothers, but I like being really honest with everybody that this is what I do for a living, but I also have a family and I do it around them as well.
Yeah. Cool. So what aspects of mythology and European fairy tales feature in your urban fantasy, and how do you fit such traditional archetypes into a contemporary fantasy world?
Well, the main one is a witch, which we actually had in the UK and England alone. We had a huge witch thing back in the medieval times, but it's not really a very historical thing compared to like the Salem trials. Right. But also a touch on the Fae, which is incredibly European with Wales and Scotland, and obviously vampires are Romanian, Transylvanian. So I really stick to the whole European fairy tales, mythology, throughout the whole book. But I really just like mixing the culture of a modern fantasy world with the mythologies. So it's rather than it just be a fantasy, I really liked it to mix, really, so you have more relatable characters that are still magic.
Yeah, I guess the next question kind of feeds into that too. Like, so what drew you to write like urban fantasy? I guess because it's a bit more relatable and it kind of has that sort of supernatural element to it. But like, is that how you started out as an author, writing urban fantasy, or did you kind of write all sorts of other stuff and then you find your niche?
No, I went straight into urban fantasy.
Okay.
I think I read such a varied amount of genres myself. I just like the immersiveness of a fantasy novel, but I really enjoy when you can read a book that you can actually relate to. So I really wanted to mix within urban fantasy. I can really mix both realism and fantasy elements quite seamlessly, and still kind of be able to immerse yourself in the story.
Yeah, it's cool to have like a witch or an elf, and they also have like an iPhone or something, and they're like, they're connected to the real world.
Yeah, well, and that was something that has come across my mind in the past too, which is what would somebody from the Middle Ages say if they stumbled upon someone from our time was zapped back to that period and had a MacBook or like an Android phone, and they're just like, hey peasant, look at all this information I have that I can just conjure up. And this is assuming that Wi-Fi still works, even though it's interdimensional.
It's fine. It's going to work.
Yeah.
I don't know, how much of the British history do you know? Because our history is morbid. A lot of torturing goes on throughout. So I don't think it'll go down well.
Probably not.
Yeah, no. I was thinking of burning at the stake would be like a mild response to.
Probably. They probably have a mob.
Yeah, but. It is kind of interesting because I think I don't know if this is necessarily true, but I think that the more time actually goes on between the present and a specific time period in history, I think the more interest tends to shift upwards, as in the older the time period, the less people are caring about it because we're actually moving forward. I don't know if this is a common experience or it could be something behind like what drew you to it, but it's I've thought about that for a little bit.
When you're a child, you're really, really interested in that sort of thing, and obviously the UK has got thousands of years of disgusting history that we have to study as well as kids. It's really nasty,
right?
But eventually it's gonna be too much history to learn in, really, because we're moving at such a fast pace, and also technology again is moving so much faster than it used to. We're leaving those times behind a lot, really.
Yeah, but it's also cool like how technology allows you to kind of find a niche historical period for you to like immerse yourself into. Like I had friends who one friend in particular who was really into Egyptology when we were growing up. So she did a whole bunch of research and, Wikipedia and whatever, because that's a reliable source. But, the fact that we have that is nice that, even beyond just school, that we can learn all this historical stuff and not just our own history, but other countries and all that kind of stuff too. Which is pretty neat. I was also going to ask, Taylor, so your Alice Skye world, does it kind of deal with, like, since you have witches and stuff, is there sort of a hint to, the burnings and the witch hunting and stuff, or is it completely just in the modern world, like what would happen here?
It's based in the modern world, now, like roughly the years now, but there is hints of like wars and the fact that everybody was hidden because they weren't accepted, and there was quite a long war about 3 centuries ago before breed, who is everybody who's not deemed as human, were even classed as citizens anywhere. So it touches on the fact they were hunted, they weren't accepted or believed in until relatively recently.
Oh, interesting. Did you have a...
No, go ahead.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I was just struck by kind of like the almost science fiction kind of aspect to it too, of like, the different races and like the wars between them and stuff, especially when something's set in the modern period. Sometimes it's hard to figure out where science fiction and fantasy kind of what the border is, because when you mix magic and modernism and all that kind of stuff, you kind of like delve into like, maybe this could happen in the future. What if we find out that fairies are real? And they like
I think that's why the fantasy and sci-fi genres is so great, because it can really easily mix and you can still get a great story from it.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, that's kind of your book, actually.
I've mentioned it a couple of times on these interviews, but I'm also a writer, so I'm working on a science fiction fantasy where there's like elves and demons and dwarves and stuff, but they're actually aliens from another planet. So
that sounds awesome.
Yeah, so they come down to Earth to kind of like, see what's up, and that's how we've created our own mythologies about them. So yeah, that's how that kind of popped up. But yeah, so I'm always interested in sort of the blends of the different genres.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, speaking about like content and genre, Taylor, a lot of your Goodreads fans mentioned that your first book, Witch's Sorrow, is packed with nail-biting action yet filled with dark humor. How do you strike that balance between dialogue and action, or do they feed into one another more so?
Well, the humour comes naturally, but also a lot of editing. Because I really knew I wanted it to be like action-packed and thrilling, but you can't really fill a book with just action because it'll get really boring fast.
Yeah.
So I really took my time developing the dialogue between the characters and making sure they're really three-dimensional, as well as just being kick-ass, really.
Yeah, I just remembered because I read the bit of the first chapter that's on your website, and the first thing that caught my eye was like, oh, Alice was like waking up, and then the first thing she said was fuck.
Yeah,
and it's like,
that's it. Yeah, that is the tone of the book.
Yeah, I just love that because you don't really see that often in urban fantasy or just genre fiction that often. It's just like a lot of.
That's pretty much it. It's just her constantly effing, fucking everything. Oh, beautiful.
Yeah, she seems like a pretty badass character.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hope so. Anyway.
I think there must be something about the urban fantasy genre where the humor is a lot more like
Gritty.
Appropriate and also gritty.
Yeah.
Because I think like if you want to be one of those folks that creates an entirely new world, new universe, and non-human races and magic all over the place, like really goes to that level. It's almost like by definition it has to be serious because it's just so it's so out there. Whereas whatever is like if you do a more minimalist approach to it, or like you make it
based in reality.
Yeah, then it's almost by necessity you have to put more humor because then
that's totally my pet peeve as well. So when you read something that's really dramatic and he just literally goes, "Oh darn," you're a fucking dick. Like in the real world, you would literally be losing your head. So I literally wrote it in the book. I said, if that's my reaction, that's going to be her action as well.
Yeah, it's very true, and you can kind of see the reflection of like kind of the author's take on swearing and stuff, like on like if they create like an epic fantasy world and like people don't really swear because it's not a big thing in that world, but if you do an urban fantasy you have to base it on reality and people swear all the time, so
I think in short it does add a layer of realism, and I think like you just point, and that's a good point, Taylor, too, is it puts more of the author's actual personality and manner into the story. What was it? Yeah. Oh yeah. My famous example is Lord of the Rings, when like there's not one reference to bodily functions or to sex or anything.
No.
Like not even a little hobbit went off and had a shite behind a bush. It's like they don't.
And it would be a shite as well. It wouldn't be a shit, it would be a shite.
Yeah. Especially Tolkien.
Yeah.
Like,
oh my god. Actually giving as much thought though, it's quite worrying.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I sometimes I think that contemporary fantasy is kind of missing that, where and I know in my own writing, like I do like paying homage to those more classic ones where it feels very epic and kind of like you're reading a mythical story as opposed to like you're just reading like a regular novel or something that it kind of feels more distant and grand in a way.
Yeah.
But I also don't want it to be entirely that, so it's kind of a struggle that I have with mine. I think a lot of authors do.
Middle.
Yeah. I was curious, Taylor, what were your inspirations for like urban fantasy specifically? Like, did you read certain authors that inspired you to get into this genre?
Or like you just like, did you like the town that you grew up in or something like that? Or
oh god, no, it's crap over here. I love being English, but Jesus, no. I've read a lot. I've been reading since I was really young. My mum used to read me the original, like Grimm Brothers, Hans Christian Andersen, like the original, really gruesome death.
Oh man,
fairy tales. Really inspiring.
They're actually kind of violent. Yeah.
Yes, and I don't know. I like so many different authors and genres. I wouldn't be able to name you one. Like I read so much. But I've always referred to fantasy a little. Obviously, I've read all the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbits, and I'm a huge sci-fi fantasy nerd, all the time. And I just knew that's what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
Have you read Kelly Armstrong? I don't know if you know her.
I haven't. She's on my things. She's on my bed list.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, because she's a Canadian author, and I read her a lot when I was a teen because, you know, angsty urban fantasy over here. I know, but yeah, her stuff is great, and I actually met her a couple of summers ago too at a book workshop, which is pretty awesome. But yeah, she is kind of what got me into urban fantasies specifically. So yeah, that's cool that you have her on your list because she's pretty awesome.
Yeah, my list is huge right now. Probably when I'm writing, I can't read because I've got to split my time.
Yeah.
It's a nice growing list. I could literally, my baby's due in January, and I know for a fact I'm going to have at least a month off. I'm going to read so much in that time.
Yeah, sometimes it's hard to strike that balance of, you know, living life, writing, and also, you know, I have to read too.
Yeah, no, like, that's my favourite pastime. I've not been able to do it for a while.
Yeah, for sure. I'm also an English major as well, so I totally get that sort of, you know, I have to read a lot for school, and then like reading for pleasure always goes to the sidelines. But yeah, and then you can't shut off your critical brain when you're reading.
I know, that's the problem. Like when I'm in my writing head, I read, all I see is that I'll pick out things, I would have said that differently, I don't really like that bit. Or I'm like, oh, that's quite an interesting bit. I just can't shut it off, just enjoy the story.
Yeah, it's quite hard sometimes to do that, especially when you're a writer and you can't shut off that brain.
Yeah.
So Taylor, you mentioned in the Q&A on your website that you would be interested in working with a traditional publishing house, specifically through hybrid publishing. Can you explain what a hybrid publication would look like and what you would consider the pros and cons of being a self-published author?
It's fine. Well, hybrid publishing is actually a mixture of both traditional and self-publishing, which obviously I call indie publishing. Which is traditional publishers will get in your books in the brick and mortar stores. But that is really difficult for indie publishing because we're not really taken seriously.
Right, still,
which is quite amusing because my books are selling really well, especially over in the States.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's not, urban fantasy is not really a huge genre here compared to the USA. But I did look into traditional publishing before I decided to self-publish. But I wasn't really willing to give up my creative control because they do like to take over from everything. As soon as you sign the rights over, that's it. They have control of when it's released. I've even read somewhere that they would probably change my English to American English.
Yes.
And as you can hear, I am British, and it's written in British English, including grammar and spelling, because it's based in London. Like, why would it be American English in London? I think it would kind of lose the authenticity of my story if I had to change it. And things like that would really piss me off. So I decided not to do that for a while. But again, I am open possibly to look into traditional publishing later on in books or different series because I have got a few more series plans. But I wouldn't give over as much creative control at all. They can shove that, really.
I think that's one of the big turnoffs about the idea of traditional publishing to begin with is, so I can't imagine when you've got like what you think is a finished product and you go to somebody, they tell you to go and like basically make it not your story anymore.
It's your art, isn't it, as well? Like, I don't want to hand it over and then go, well, I like it, but it would look better like this. I'm like, well, no. Yeah. You liked it what it is, don't change it.
Yeah, it's definitely a fine balance. Like, you definitely have to find someone who has the same vision as you for your own story. Yeah. And that can be quite rare, I think, because, as a writer, you're kind of like, hoping that you'll just get someone to like your book and to sell your book for you. And then, so you kind of just grab whoever has an interest. But, you really have to search for someone who has the same vision as you and kind of gets the heart of your story and doesn't want to change things that much. But, it's quite hard, I think, with traditional publishing now because they are kind of I don't want to say dying, but they're changing drastically and they're trying to stay afloat. So the things that they prioritize might not be the same as what we would as artists.
Yeah.
So I don't think they're dying, but I think indie is really taken over.
Yeah.
Because we can do it just as well as a traditional, just by doing it ourselves. And it is just having to learn the business side of it as well as being creative, which is difficult, but there's so much help for us out there.
Yeah.
That I do recommend that even if someone's just in an R&D, you can even start as a self-publishing indie and then possibly look into traditional later on, which has happened to quite a few people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What would you think if for writer listeners out there? What's the first step that you would recommend for people who have something that they've written and are thinking of doing self-publishing?
Make sure you get it edited professionally. The reason why indies are really looked down upon is that quite a lot don't get it professionally edited. They think it's fine. Unless you're like an English grad like yourself, or they've studied it. Like, I know for a fact my grammar is awful. It really is. So I'm really grateful for my editor.
Right.
It doesn't have to cost the earth or anything, but I do recommend it. Think of it as it's still a business to yourself. So while it's still art and it's still like creative, you still need to treat it like a business and to get people to keep reading it, wanting to come back for more books in the series.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it seems like you've been doing really great with that because, looking through all the reviews and the sort of feedback people have given you, it seems like people are very receptive to your story, which, urban fantasy, especially like in the States and stuff, it's quite, saturated, I guess. Like, there's quite a lot of it out there, but the fact that, you got so much positive response for that, it's really impressive, especially like these days, so.
Trust me, no one's more surprised than me. You're like, he's doing all right. Like, that's surprising.
No, it must be such a great feeling too. I mean, you probably put so much work into it, and getting to see that.
A lot of blood, sweat, and tears went into it.
Yeah. Switching gears towards coming towards the end of the interview, just wanted to ask a kind of philosophical question. So, something that kind of comes up a lot, especially on your own sort of Goodreads channel, is that they would recommend Witch's Sorrow to anyone who secretly wishes that they could do magic. And that's like basically every like nerd out there who, like, basically, like, why wouldn't you? But sort of in your own sort of opinion, beyond these sort of obvious gaining of unique powers and you have like influence over other people, why do you think people are so fascinated and find so much appeal in the idea of doing magic in a modern world?
Come on, how cool would that be? Like, who wouldn't want to have magic? Like, only boring people. Like, it would even make you even more unique, like, than you already are. Like, it would just be so awesome. And I'm still very disappointed it doesn't exist right now, that we know of anyway.
I know. I was still disappointed when I didn't get my Hogwarts letter.
Yeah.
Oh, trust me. What have I was born in, I think, 93. And I think that was the year that in Hogwarts there was a war or something. I haven't got a perfect memory of it. But it was the one year that I think when I hit 11, I wouldn't have received my Hogwarts invitation. So yeah, I'm devastated.
Still stuck in the owl post somewhere, I'm sure.
Bullshit.
Yeah, I know. I was so convinced I was gonna
get it.
Yeah. And then that was the big secret to everything, was it was all real.
Yeah. And I guess, like, especially for, kids in the US or North America, Canadians like us, we thought that, kids in Britain, because, it's set in Britain, I think they actually got to go to Hogwarts and stuff. And it's like, no,
trust
that's
me.
How it works.
If I could lie to you right now, so they would, I'm just as disappointed.
Yeah, it's gonna even sting more because it's like Scotland's right there.
Yeah,
like, there's no.
I've even been to the place where it was like the outside was filmed. And it just hurts.
Yeah.
Oh no, it's quite a beautiful location though.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful place though, from what I've seen.
Magical in itself. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. That's a pretty straightforward answer because it's freaking awesome.
Why not?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, how about this? What type of magical power would you want if you could have one?
Oh, that's so hard. Like, it really is. Like, I've always been interested in the elements anyway. Like, being able to control the elements. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, for sure.
It depends what sort of magic you choose, whether it's something you're born with or something you have to learn, like Harry Potter.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I would be one of the nerdiest people I've ever met, and I'd know everything. Like, really condescending assholes. I'll be Hermione Granger.
Yeah, definitely.
But, oh no, don't worry. I've been studying this my whole life.
For sure.
What was yours? Is yours also an element?
Yeah, probably
Elemental.
the elements. I love Storm from X-Men. My own characters have elemental powers, so it's always been a thing. Yeah. How about you?
I just basically want like Google, but in my head.
Google, but in your head.
You want a super brain.
Yeah, like just know the answer to anything. And there's that Irish myth, Finn McCool, where he burns his. I think he catches the salmon of knowledge and then burns his thumb on it.
Whoa.
And so after that, if he just wanted to know the answer to a question, he just puts his thumb in his mouth and hums these magical words.
Like the idea of knowing it also, but then you've got to put your thumb in your mouth. That's really like you look at it and go, like.
I mean, there's a cost to everything.
Yeah,
everything has a drawback, right? So it's like if you want to actually know everything, you have to look like a moron first.
Yeah, that's an interesting juxtaposition. It's like you're the smartest person, but you got your thumb in your mouth like a baby.
And then,
That's never lottery numbers, but but you're sucking your thumb. Do I trust the answer?
Mm-hmm.
It's true. Yeah. Who knows if it's the truth?
Yeah.
If it's like a tough question, you know.
So you really just have to use it for your own purposes. So if you're taking a test, you've got the one hand writing the answers, one thumb.
Yeah,
one thumb in the.
It just seems like you have severe anxiety. No one will judge you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. But then you'd have to flavor your thumb, though, right? Because if it's in there all the time,
oh my god,
you better taste good.
There's way too much thought in this.
I think you could write a short story about this, about Finn McCool and modern,
there you go. So that's Finn McCool if he's
Yeah.
transported and he was born in Dublin today or something in 2019. What he'd be like.
That'd be pretty awesome.
Sure.
I'd read it. There you go.
There you go.
First
right
official
back.
endorsement. Awesome. So Taylor, what should readers of Witch's Sorrow expect from Druid's Storm?
Cool. So the Druid's Storm is roughly several months placed after Witch's Sorrow. So it's a full-length novel. It dives a little bit deeper into her own past, which is incredibly full of dark secrets that she's kind of unveiling herself. As well as you see a few more characters that you already met as well, and going through their past. It's all very dark and disturbing. Plus, there's a whole new range of characters that were introduced to help develop the world even further. But I can't go into more details because it's very complicated. But yes, it's just as twisty and dark and humorous as the first one.
Nice. And so for readers who haven't read your first book, which is Sorrow, like what books would you sort of like if they read these, would they like your book? Like what other, I didn't phrase that right. Like what books would you compare it to?
Compared to things like Kim Harrison and her, is it Rachel Morgan, compared to Kate Daniels and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So
cool. Okay, awesome. So a lot of jam-packed action and wit and sort of dark suspense.
She's Brodeen as well.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah, that's all the questions that we had.
Wait, I got one more.
Oh, you got one more. One more boiling up.
So Taylor, when writing, preferred narcotic of choice, alcohol, caffeine, or just water?
Who chooses water?
That's a narcotic. Fluid of
you're not
life.
going to give me any more options. Like I should go deep into drugs I use. No, it's probably caffeine. I've cut down my alcohol consumption, unfortunately.
Oh yes, yeah.
Obviously, I'm pregnant, so my son's quite small. But yeah, caffeine. I am pretty much addicted to lattes, which is a pathetic version of caffeine. But there you go.
It's like the most.
Proper caffeine drinkers look at me in disgust. I'm sitting there with my soya latte with like caramel in it, and I'm just sitting there happy.
Not even real English dairy. It's like this neutered milk products. But
It's not my fault I was born with lactose intolerant.
And funny thing is that Morgan's also lactose intolerant, so he's just playing the devil's advocate here.
That's fair though. I eat so much cheese and chocolate anyway that I probably should just drink normal milk. And consequences.
All right. Well, okay, fair, cool.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I think I went through the transition too of being an alcoholic writer to a caffeinated writer. So
yeah, you kind of have to calm down.
Alcoholic writer or better with the caffeine.
Well, the thing is, one is kind of frowned down upon, and the other one is like, it's the way that the world is fueled now. Everyone kind of.
Is it frowned down upon? Like, depends if you admit you're an alcoholic.
It's true. Yeah.
I have vodka with my morning breakfast. No one cares.
Yeah. Okay. And informal, funny question.
Number two.
Number two is, I wonder if for North Americans there's some sort of impetus or good reason for us to have like a pilgrimage back to the linguistic motherland. You know what I mean? Because there's just this pull towards that part of the world when it comes to writing, and I think it's because of the history. I think it's just too hard to kind of divorce from it, or use nationality as like a barrier to wanting to access that part of the world or something. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. North Americans have a huge fascination with British culture and all that kind of stuff.
I have no idea. I don't know why.
Yeah.
No, we love their writers, the musicians, the TV shows. Like, my mom watches Corey still.
Corey.
Still.
Is that what it's called, Corey?
Like,
Coronation
Street.
Yeah. On the telly.
On the telly.
Just go on and on. Yeah, so maybe that's something that we could talk about next time for writers from here to go to the UK and kind of like soak up a bit more.
Yeah.
And become a bit more cultured, I think.
Yeah.
Be more cultured.
Yeah.
Talking to the wrong person.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about perspective, right? Because Americans don't think that they have accents, and Canadians as well, but obviously we do. It just depends on where you are.
Yeah, I don't think anybody has that. Like, I think they have accent, but then you talk to someone with an accent, you're like, oh my god, I can hear my own accent.
Yeah.
I don't think I sound English. Well, it's all you guys. I sound English. It's just really strange.
Yeah,
it's true. I know. We just have to put our shoes in our feet in the other shoe. I don't know what I'm saying anymore. It is
alcohol.
Yeah, just go pour out some more. No, it definitely takes two to create an accent, I think. So,
So for now, do let us know where folks can find your new release.
Witches Sorrow is available on Amazon right now, and DRUIDS STORM is on Amazon from November the 1st. Enjoy!
Awesome. Great. And where can people find you on social media?
So I am on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, pretty much under Taylor Aston White, because my name's too long otherwise, so that's write it down to my nickname. And I'll just share all that details with you guys. And I've also got a TaylorAstonWhite.com, where you'll find up-to-date details for my upcoming books.
Awesome. Great. And we'll have all the links down in the description as well.
There's a charity anthology coming out in January. So the charity is called To Write Love on Her Arms. And it's an anthology. I think there's 40 plus authors involved in this one huge ebook. I think there's roughly about 2 books coming out as well, and 100% of proceedings go to that charity as well, which is also a huge charity over there.
Oh, wow. Okay. Very cool. So, we'll definitely look up the charity, and if we can find the anthology information as well, we'll put it down in the description. Thank you for coming on, and best of luck with the release and also with the delivery as well.
That's beautiful. That a bit like it. It's exciting stuff.
Well, cool stuff. And you enjoy the rest of your Sunday evening, Taylor, and we'll talk to you soon, hopefully.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Speak to you guys soon.
Great. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Take care.
If you like this episode of our podcast, you can follow us on our social media to get updates on our future episodes. On Facebook, we're at facebook.com/highfantasypodcast. On Instagram, we're at highfantasypodcast. And on Twitter, we're at podcast_fantasy. And don't forget to subscribe here on YouTube as well.